that he leaves, because whatever he has written is extremely, extremely complex. So when you think of Mahabharata, there are four major Krishnas that occur in Mahabharata. The first is the author himself. No, it's like Amitabh Bachchan says his pura naam is Vijay Dinanath Chauhan. So Vyasa's pura naam was Krishna Dvaipayana Vyas. So he forms the main Krishna of Mahabharata, and of course he describes the story of the three other Krishnas. The one that we already know of, the other two are also known as Krishna or Krishna. Now they are bonded together not only by their dusky complexions, but they are also bonded together by their friendship. I also call them the constructive trio, because for any story to happen, there have to be people who bring about changes. Now you can say Duryodhana and Shakuni also brought about changes, but they were the ones who were the destructive ones. But for these three, I call them the constructive trio. I also think of them in terms of the mind, the heart, and the hand, because all three are required in one human being, and that is what they are to me. Because Krishna was the one who provided the ideas, the diplomacy, etc. Draupadi was the one. She was the heart. She provided the passion and she provided the inspiration for the findings there. And the one who was executing all of their ideas and their passions was the one who had the expertise and the finesse, and that was Arjun. So for me, these three always come together. They are not really separate entities for me. So that's when I zeroed down on Arjun as my central figure. And the quote that came to mind was by my favorite author, Ayn Rand. She always said that the central theme of any novel cannot belong to anybody else but the hero. So what was it about Arjun that I loved? I looked around for various books from his perspective, and I realized that there isn't anything written from his perspective explaining what he thought of the multiple events and emotions that went on in his life. So another quote that came to mind was by Toni Morrison, who said, "If there is a book that you really want to read, but it hasn't been written yet, then you must be the one who should write it." So I thought, why not take the mantle upon myself and be the voice and the eyes of Arjuna? Now, what is fascinating about Arjun is that he's got the perfect mixture of contrast in his persona. For example, he's got the perfect balance of the yin and the yang. He has the aggression of a warrior, and he's got the compassionate side to him as well. When it comes to his life, there's so much that is going on as an outward journey, because he was always the go-getter for Indraprastha, for his kingdom. He was the one who was always on sojourns, on war campaigns, getting weapons for his kingdom, etc. That so much of outward journey happening in his life that somehow I think in the Mahabharata there hasn't been enough space given to his inward journey as to what he thought, what he went through, his angst, his passions, etc. And that is the one that I wanted to explore as much as I could. I also find a very fascinating contrast in his ability to wreak about devastation, and at the same time his restraint in not misusing his powers. So there's something, a very Brahmin mindset as well as a Kshatriya mindset that is existing within him. He also was a person who was extremely masculine. At the same time, there was a time in his life when he was cursed to become a eunuch. So the masculine and the feminine side of his life is also very well balanced in his side, because as a eunuch, he had to learn dancing. So his warrior body had to transform and to bend and to learn to behave like a feminine dancer's body. So for me, he's on the lookout to learn new things passionately and to master them to the best of his ability. So he was someone who could utilize the right and left half of his brains perfectly. But as I said, I looked around and I found that there weren't any books which told about what he thought of. So somewhere I found his voice was a little muted. And it's possible that in our current context, it's possible that the silence often gets misquoted. And I found many books where there was a tendency to vilify the heroes and to deify the villains. And I thought somewhere the perspective should be put right for this generation or for the next generation, so that they at least learn to love the ones who are the actual heroes. So this book for me was basically an attempt to restore glory where it belongs and for the right reasons. So that was Arjun through his eyes and in his voice. Now, being Arjun, if I had to write in sync with his character, then his voice would be a little muted, it will be modest and be restrained. So I wanted a voice which was contrasting to him, and that obviously I found it in his Ardhangini, the great Draupadi, who I absolutely adore. As her voice for me is very fiery, very outspoken, and she says exactly what should be said at the time that it should be said. And at the same time, there's a certain aspects of her personality. Like, for example, somehow when we think of Draupadi, we just say, oh, the wife of 5 husbands, and we leave it at that. But we don't really know that she was basically the CEO of Indraprastha. She was the treasurer. She used to look around after all the personnel that were there at Indraprastha. So she was the PR, she was the HR, whatever you think of it, of Indraprastha. So all of those facets also I wanted to explore a lot. And of course, Krishna himself. Now, in my book, what I kept is I kept his divine aspect away, because somehow I think that the divine aspect takes away a lot or deviates attention away from the fact that he was so wise, he was so eloquent, he had so much diplomacy and so much foresight. So those are the qualities that I wanted to project upon or highlight upon. So I kept his divine part totally away in my book. So as I started researching for this book, researching for this book, is it okay? Is it audible?
It's covering your face.
Yeah, okay. So as I started researching for the book, I realized that there were many stories which are there in the common perception, and at the same time there were many hidden facts which were not really hidden. I just had to scratch the surface, and I could find multiple new eureka moments that I could search as I went through the researches. And for the research, I went to the biggest volume, that is the Bori classification. That is the edition of which is made by Pune after multiple researches. So during this research, I found that there were some instances which are really hidden. Now what happens is the epic itself is so vast and so voluminous that people don't really tend to read the entire thing in details. So what they instead do is that they rely on the more accessible and the more entertaining avenues like novels or television serials, and those may not always highlight the tiny or the more vital parts which are missing out, and those are the ones that I found as I went during my research. So I also found the joy of busting a lot of myths as I went in this novel. So there are just a few instances that I'll give you. For example, what is the common conception about when Draupadi was brought to Kunti's hut? If any of you would be knowing, what is the common thing that happened that Kunti said? What is the common knowledge about that? Pardon me?
She said share or something like that.
No.
Thought they had brought arms and said share it equally as always or something.
Right. So the common knowledge is that she didn't know, Kunti did not know that the Draupadi was coming to the hut. So the 5 brothers came together along with Draupadi, and Kunti just blurted out by mistake, just share whatever you have got amongst ourselves. Now, when I was researching for this thing, I got the actual sequence of events was that after Arjun won the Swayamvar, Draupadi garlanded him, and after this moment, Yudhishthir and the twins left the hall. Now, after they had left the hall, what happened was a skirmish took place between Arjun and the losing suitors in Draupadi's Swayamvar. So Bhim was also present along with Arjun to fight with these losing suitors. So after this entire battle was there, then Draupadi and along with Arjun and Bhim went back to the hut. So in this time lapse, Yudhishthira had already reached the hut. So by this time, Kunti already knew that it was Draupadi who was coming back to the hut and not just arms. Okay. So when I thought of that, it became very obvious to me that Kunti and Yudhishthira had maybe in some ways taken advantage of the fact that Arjun did not know this. So when I thought of that, I thought, why should Kunti do such a thing? Okay, if I look at the personality of Kunti, I think she was an extremely ambitious woman, and she thought at that moment that it was best to indulge Yudhishthir's desire. She must have seen the desire in Yudhishthir's eyes, and she just decided to indulge it. Okay, now this I think is a very vital point for the future, because this moment when Kunti indulged him, she kind of concreted in his mind that his younger brothers were his property. Whatever they won, whatever they achieved, whatever their whole life was basically his to rule. Now that is what must have probably in the future must have allowed him to pledge a wife who he had not won, to pledge the brothers that were not his to rule, and to give away the kingdom which was not won by him. So I think this is a very vital point in the entire narrative, which is not really brought about by many television serials. Another instance I thought of is in terms of Sanjay, who is basically the war correspondent who describes the battle of Kurukshetra. Now again, anything that is commonly known about Sanjay and the way he narrates the battle to Dhritarashtra? That's the king, his king. Yes, the Dhritarashtra, the king, is blind, and Sanjay is the one narrating the battle to him. So right, right. So just before the war began, it's a common knowledge that Vyasa approached him. He gifted him with a divine vision, and this divine vision was so powerful that it allowed him to see anything that was happening either by day or by night, whether it was happening on the battlefield or it was happening in the tents, and it could even penetrate to the minds and see what is happening within the mind. Okay? Now, if I thought of this kind of a power, think of it. If the Pandava camp was having war discussions every day, they would be formulating their strategies for the next day. Now, if Sanjay's vision was so powerful and was allowed so much of an access, it would be like having multiple CCTVs in the Pandava camp, which would be relating everything that they are planning for the next day to the Kaura camp. Okay, so basically, is it possible that Sanjay was a spy that was implanted there? Now, when I went through the entire epic, I found that there are multiple instances where Sanjay was actually there on the battlefield. He was not sitting far away at Hastinapur by Dhritarashtra's side. He was very much on the battlefield. In fact, in every day's discussions that Duryodhana and his company had for the next day's strategies, Sanjay was very much part and parcel of that discussions. Okay? So when I thought of that part of him, I realized that obviously this is not a person who can be impartial in his narration. Okay? So it's something I thought of is something similar to an Indo-Pakistan match, which is suppose is taking place in some faraway island, and you are sitting here. You have no access to that match there. There's no internet, no smartphones, no mobile, no television to tell you what is exactly happening in that Indo-Pak match. Your only link to that match is Sanjay, the radio commentator. Okay, and Sanjay is a Pakistani commentator. So what is going to happen now is that he cannot change the fact that India won the match, because that is the final outcome. What he can say is India did underhand bowling, or the umpires gave all the wrong decisions to the Pakistani players, or there was too much of crowd support for the Indians, etc. Okay, so what he can really do is he can put in little nuggets of accusations or slurs against the losers, against the winners. Okay, and that is probably what has exactly happened, because when we say of Kurukshetra, we usually say, oh, Krishna cheated, the Pandavas cheated. And when I actually went to the epic, I found multiple instances where this was really, really untrue. So there are points that probably Sanjay, the narrator, has put across, and that is because he was not really impartial, he was not neutral. He was very much, he had his heart bleeding for his own king and his own kingdom, that was of Duryodhana. Okay. Another instance I found out is that Karna is usually said to be a person who was denied a lot of things because of his caste or because he was a Suta Putra. The actual point is that he was actually Dronacharya's student, because his father was the charioteer of Dhritarashtra, the king of Hastinapur. So Karna was allowed to be a student of Dronacharya alongside Arjuna and the other people. And his rivalry to Arjun dated much back than we think of. So even in the childhood, he and Duryodhana were very much close cronies, and their conspiracies against the Pandavas had already started much way back. Another instance that we think of again is in terms of Eklavya. Eklavya again, the common story is that, any volunteers? The cutting of the thumb. Okay, so basically they say that Dronacharya was a Brahmin who refused to accept any kind of lower caste students, and Eklavya happened to be a tribal person. So because Eklavya went ahead with his training, Dronacharya asked for a fee, and he asked Eklavya to cut his thumb. And the story basically ends there as far as Eklavya is concerned. So what the story does is that it leaves a very ugly taste in the mouth. It creates a kind of caste slur around Dronacharya, and it creates a atmosphere of a Brahmin Dronacharya refusing a tribal eklavya for the sake of a Kshatriya Arjun. So basically there's something, a very dirty thing that is existing around Dronacharya and around Arjun. So when I went along in my research, I probed into the background of Eklavya, and I realized that he was a prince. He was not really just tribal, he was a prince who belonged to the Nishad tribe. Now, Dronacharya, he earned his livelihood to Hastinapur kingdom, and Hastinapur's main enemy was the Magad Empire. And this person, Eklavya, was the one serving the Magad Empire. So basically, if Dronacharya had trained Eklavya, it would have been like training the enemy against our own kingdom. So it would have been treachery on the part of Dronacharya to train Eklavya. So maybe that was the reason that he really stopped Eklavya from learning everything that he wanted to learn. At the same time, I thought that this story of Eklavya still leaves behind a feeling that there is an adversity that is occurring in someone's life. Okay? But then at myself, there should be a step ahead of adversity, of how to get out of adversity. Okay, it's possible that Eklavya could have lost his thumb in an animal attack or in some other kind of an accident. So what would he have done beyond that step? Would he have stopped living? Would he have stopped, eating? Would he have just not survived? And that's when I found the fact that Sabyasachi existed. Okay, Sabyasachi is nobody but Arjun. It's just a synonymous name for Arjun, and it means an ambidextrous archer. That means Arjun could shoot as well with his right hand as well with his left hand. So here I thought is a chance for me to juxtapose these two events and to say that probably the event that happened with Eklavya was the one which instigated Arjun I thought it's probably the incident that happened with Eklavya could have stimulated Arjun into self-training himself to become as good with his left hand as well as with his right hand. Now, why is that so? If you think in terms of Dronacharya, he was not really partial to Arjun. There are multiple instances where he tried to stop Arjun from learning many things. For example, he stopped Arjun from learning the sonic archery. He tried to stop Arjun from learning the Chakravyuha. He taught his own son Ashwathama a weapon called Narayan Astra, but he did not teach it to Arjun. And at the final instance, when he really had to prove his loyalty, he sided with Hastinapur, and he was the main person involved in the death of Arjun's son Abhimanyu. So there are many instances where there was anti-Arjun propaganda going on in Dronacharya's mind. So I thought of this incident in terms of going from a negative event to a positive event, and to say how Arjun could self-train himself and self-learn even from adversities. Another incident is what I would plan to read out for today, and that is in terms of Shikhandi. Again, any common knowledge about Shikhandi, especially in terms of Bhishma's death, Bhishma and Shikhandi? What is the connection? Yes, they say that Shikhandi was a reincarnation of a previous birth, and he was trying to basically avenge himself by Bhishma's death. So what I wanted to, as I read through the Mahabharata, I realized that the Pandavas basically had 7 battalions at the Kurukshetra battle, and every battalion was commanded by one person. So they had 7 commanders. So one of the commanders was Shikhandi. Okay, so basically Shikhandi was not just a pawn brought for one day on the battlefield. He was a warrior. He was well known. He had a battalion which was consisted of 1:1:3:5 ratio of chariots, elephants, horses, and cavalrymen. And the soldiers under him were approximately 1,003,950. So that was the huge amount that was entrusted to his care. So he was very much a warrior of repute. In fact, Bhishma himself, when he rated the warriors of his as well as his opposing army, he rated Shikhandi as one of the good warriors. Shikhandi was also trained under Dronacharya. So his caliber as a warrior now became very clear to me. So then I thought to myself, what is his motive for wanting to kill Bhishma? If I wanted to rule out the supernatural or the previous birth story, so what was his motive for killing Bhishma? And I realized that Shikhandi was Draupadi's brother. Okay, so although her twin brother was Drishtadimna, but her elder brother was Shikhandi. Now, whoever insulted her or molested her in that court, in that game of dice, everyone else was accounted for by either Arjun or by Bhim. But the one who was remaining, Bhishma, he could have been killed by Arjun, but Arjun, of course, had a soft corner for Bhishma. So obviously, he needed some instigation to propagate him to kill Shikhandi. So I used this incident here. Also, why I'm reading out this incident because when Vyasa describes Kurukshetra war, he doesn't really bring Draupadi's perspective into it. Now, taken the fact that she is said to be one of the motivating factors for Kurukshetra, there's no really incident there where you learn what she felt at every death or at every event that occurred here. So what I did is I brought in her perspective as well, because I found there's a lot of contrast in what Arjun feels and what Draupadi feels at every event that occurs at Kurukshetra. Also, her voice, in her voice, allowed me to describe Arjun's triumphs or victories, because Arjun himself, when he's saying when he's describing in the first person, he's not going to be bragging about his triumphs at Kurukshetra, because for him the entire Kurukshetra was a feeling of melancholy, of gloom, of distaste and reluctance. So there's no way he's going to be gloating over his triumphs. So I needed a second voice from Arjun's side to say what he could achieve and what he was capable of. So that is why I brought in Draupadi as a second narrator and in the entire epic and especially at Kurukshetra. So may I read out this part to you? The arrow seems to be escaping me. Anyone can help me? Sudhir, the arrow seems to be escaping me.
What, Arjun?
No, yeah, not Arjun, sorry. This one. I traveled to read. To read. Okay, so basically Arjun is going to be speaking and later on Draupadi will be narrating the incident. So this is Arjun speaking now. I did not have the heart to mortally wound Bhishma Pitamaha, in spite of every word that Krishna spoke to me. Pitamaha and I retorted with arrows, more mock than intent. Pitamaha's armor of immortality and my reluctance to slay him kept the battle raging around us. He was their army's supreme shield, the one I was not willing to pierce. The war, which could have ended in one day, kept escalating. Krishna reminded me that death smiled every moment of the 9 days that we mock duelled. Finally, on the 9th day, Krishna flung back his reins, jumped down from his chariot, and heaved up a chariot wheel from a nearby cart. He had an austere smile on his face. He stood poised to hurl that paltry weapon at Pitama, while Pitama stood straight, his arms open, awaiting liberation at Krishna's hands. Krishna's eyes sparkled and they seemed to say, "This is how vows ought to be broken, whenever vows hinder the righteous path and whenever vows threaten to become the core of a clan's destruction." They exchanged a knowing glance and then Krishna lowered the wheel calmly. On the 10th day, Shikhandi finally approached me, said, "You want me to finish this charade?" He asked evenly, reining his chariot parallel to mine. "No," I said shortly. "Pitama will not return your attack." You cannot continue attacking a warrior who does not retort. There's something wrong with this. I'm sorry. Shikhandi shrugged impatiently. He is too masculine to battle anyone with a feminine name, not fully a male, or anyone who has been a woman before. Isn't that his vow? Yet I believe that he battled Brihanada at the Viratnagar battle. She did not interfere with this holy dictum. When I did not reply, he pointed his blood-stained sword at the battlefield. My sister Draupadi was completely defenseless at Hastinapur's game of dice. She had no warrior for help, no weapon at hand. Nothing except her scorching words. Bhishma still has his weapons at hand. He can either die fighting Shikhandi or he can die at Shikhandi's hands defenseless. I'm sorry, this seems to. His reluctance to fight me is his problem, not mine. Pardon me? Okay. He spurred on his chariot towards Pitama, discarding the sword for the bow. I saw Pitama holding onto the standard of his chariot, stubbornly refusing to counterattack Shikhandi. He dodged and veered, wincing as many of the arrows found their mark. Move into his line of vision, I urged Krishna. Pitama whirled to me with obvious relief. He deliberately turned away from Shikhandi. His eyes spoke a plea that I read clearly. Now Pitama's dilemma had another option, myself. I, however, had no other option now except to carry this duel to its gory end. We let fly a barrage of arrows, combating fiercely under the watchful eyes of Shikhandi, who stood ready to resume his attack if I relented the tiniest bit. There was nothing mock about my final battle with Pitama. It was a brutal battle. I snapped his bow multiple times, shred his armor until it spurted blood. He then took up his assortment of weapons. I splintered his spear into fragments and snapped his sword into two, until finally Pitama reeled and fell from his chariot. He lay inert on the bed of arrows that I presented to him, his breath in shallow gasps. My arrows shrouded his body like I was showering flower petals, my final obeisance to this peerless legend. I knew I was sentencing myself to a lifetime of whispered venom, accusing fingers, and the burden of killing my own grandfather. When we had arrived at Hastinapur as children, we were yearning to belong to a father figure. There had been nothing forced or calculated about Pitama's love for us. Many were the times when he cushioned me upon his lap, finger-fed me from his plates, spent patient hours by my side as I wandered through the weapons room, showering him with questions, and many were the times that he laughed as I mistook him for my father and called him Tat. Pitama was the real heir of Hastinapur, the only true blood heir. And yet he had stepped back from the throne without hesitation, without greed, and without a tinge of bitterness. His vow of celibacy cut off his legacy forever. He must have yearned for a son to cuddle, a child he was never allowed to have. How many unfulfilled desires did he carry with him into the next? Krishna had told me to perform my duties and not worry over the consequences. It was the most difficult of all his tenets. I could not separate the deed from its effects. I still mourned for Pitama. I always would. I looked at Krishna in the ochre light of sunset. He looked tranquil. He did not merely say words, he actually lived his words. Krishna too had battled his own relatives, his uncle Kamsa and his cousin Shishupal. Yet I wondered very much, would he have been able to kill his father Nanda? Krishna had told me that the body is a mere shell for the soul, a perishable soul for an imperishable. If the soul directed the physical body, then the soul had to accept responsibility. I wondered, if the soul remained immortal, what was the point of destroying the body? Krishna said, Kurukshetra was for the purpose of erasing evil souls from the earth. I thought to myself, I wish that there existed a weapon that could erase evil from souls. Whatever wisdom Krishna imparted to me on the eve of war, hearing it was one thing, absorbing it was another thing, but living it was quite altogether at another level. Then the night falls, and as Bhishma is lying on his bed of arrows, Draupadi approaches Bhishma. Bhishma Pitama lifted his heavy eyelids, his eyes dull with pain. He gazed unblinking as I approached him. No, I did not go for his blessings. I went because I wanted to see his bed of arrows. I went to admire the superlative skills that made his bed almost as interesting as the legend that lay on it. Every arrow in Pitama's body was exactly evenly spaced from each other. Every corresponding paired arrow was equidistant from his spine. Every tip exactly perpendicular to the ground and exactly parallel to each other. It was mathematical precision and a work of genius. I had asked Arjun once long ago, "Do you like killing?" And he had said calmly, "I like winning." I'm conditioned to deal with death, but I don't relish it. There's nothing poetic about death. Pitama's lips moved as I approached. "Forgive me, child," he murmured, "for that which is unforgivable." But his indifference at Hastinapur's game of dice was not his only sin. My husbands had arrived at Hastinapur as fatherless toddlers. Pitama was expected to be a shield to these helpless children. Yet they had been tormented, taunted, bullied, poisoned, and the patriarch chose to turn a blind eye, a deaf ear, and a cold shoulder to them. My husbands were almost burnt alive. They were pilfered off from the kingdom of Hastinapur. Instead, they were handed over a barren Khandav forest as their inheritance, and yet his silence had hibernated too many crimes. His silence had fueled and festered far too many crimes. He said to me, "I've atoned for my sins, child. These arrows that are drinking my vitals belong to Arjun. None except him can slay me." I said, "Pitama, I was born because of Arjun's arrows. I was won in marriage by Arjun's arrows. I need no assistance to recognize Arjun's arrows." In Pitama's body, I also saw the arrows that he was hoping nobody else would notice. I knew how to read wounds and weapons. I distinguished Arjun and Shikhandi's arrows quite clearly. They were the same metal and the same size. Arjun's arrows always went clean through the body, intended to kill swiftly and almost mercifully. The entry and the exit points had the tiniest speck of blood, as if the body was impaled by magic. It was not an act meant for gloating. It was a job well executed, to be disposed of with minimal pain and maximum impact. The other arrows belonged to Shikhandi. Their path was wobbly, purposely wobbly. They were meant to leave a yawning gash in the skin, meant to tear through muscle, meant to cause agony. Merciful death and merciless wounds. Death without pain and pain without death. I saw both embedded in the sole remnant of the Kuru dynasty. Pitama had staunchly refused to battle Shikhandi. My brother had borne sons with his wife. He was army commander in charge of an entire battalion since the first day of Kurukshetra. He survived fierce duels with other warriors. He shed blood and he drew blood. What audacious facade of masculinity rendered Pitama so contemptuous of my brother? Why this terrified abstinence, as if Shikhandi's arrows would penetrate Pitama's fragile virginity? If Pitama could not use his seniority as a shield, if Pitama could not use his seniority as a sword, then he had no right to use his seniority as a shield. I could still hear the echo of his words from the court of Hastinapur, the senior-most member of his clan who did not lift a single finger of help for Draupadi, the clan's daughter-in-law. As I stood in silence beside Pitama's bed of arrows, Shikhandi approached me. He clasped my shoulder protectively and inclined his head, signaling for us to leave. I looked back once for the last time at the multiple pools of blood. Pitama's blood was congealed and stained an unusual brown. It drooped in the shape of a question mark, forming a pool at the tip of each arrow. The last of Kuru blood seeped into the soil, a question mark forever. Thank you. नाही फक्त हे लास्ट सर्विस नाही इथं दिसत नाही आहे ना इकडे दिसत नाही आय थिंक द कनेक्शन इज Apart from such instances, there is another incident that I found is where usually the Pandavas are blamed for pledging their wife and basically making her a slave and putting her at the mercy of the Kauravas. So I thought to myself, is it possible that the Pandavas could have had such a chance, and how would they have reacted if they had this chance of this? So the usual answer is that they never had this chance because Duryodhana never pledged his wives. So I found an incident in the entire epic. This is where the Kaurava, the Duryodhana and his entire army, his friends circle as well as his wives come to the forest where the Pandavas are already in exile. They come basically with the intent to taunt the Pandavas. But what happens is that a group of Gandharvas, they attack the Duryodhana and his company. They completely rout Duryodhana's army and they imprison Duryodhana as well as his brothers and his wives and start taking them away. And at this point is the Pandavas who step in, basically Bhim and Arjun, who step in and rescue Duryodhana from the Gandharvas. And the Gandharvas hands over Duryodhana, his wives, as well as his sons, as prisoners of war to Arjun and Bhim. So now the tables have completely turned. It's the Bhim and Arjun who are now they have the power. If they wish, they could have done exactly to Duryodhana's wives what happened to their wife. They had the motive. They had the reason to do so. They had the power at this moment to do so. But what they did was they let off Duryodhana's wives with complete, as they say, the complete prestige was saved. So what I wanted to highlight here was another point is that it's not always just the power that is invested in you. Virtue basically is not the same as power. Virtue is that which lasts in spite of having power, and that's what I wanted to highlight in this incident. So there's many such instances that I found as I went through the entire epic. So the main intent of my book basically was, as Gurcharan Das, who did an analytical work on Mahabharata, he said that Mahabharata throws up more questions than answers, and I found that to be equally true. But the whole purpose of writing this book for me was basically to highlight these points, to put them into people's minds and to start churning their minds so that they start questioning whatever has been presented to them over many years. That's all. Thank you so much. Thank you so much for coming. I would love to have any questions, any kind of suggestions, any kind of feedbacks. Yes, Jan.
So first of all, thank you for writing this from the point of view of Arjuna.
Yes.
I had never thought of it that way. So for me, it totally opened up new vistas.
Yes.
The second question I had, I think you answered some of it, but maybe we'll like to hear a little more. It's really about the research. So you did talk about the original Granth. So can you tell us a little more about it and what kind of research you did? Because honestly, I cannot separate fact from fiction when I read
Right.
this. And it also tells me that you do have a deep understanding of what's there. So I'd like to tell us a little more about the source.
Yeah. Thank you so much, author. I would love to have got my hands on the original that Vyasa wrote. But the thing is that the Mahabharata itself has passed through at least three retellings. The very original one that he narrated was called as Jaya, and that had only 8,800 verses. The second version, which his disciple recited to Janamajaya, that had at least 10 times more verses. And the third generation the version that we get to hear has at least 10,000 verses. So there has been at least 100-fold increase in the number of verses which were originally there. So what formulated the basis for my book was the Bori edition, that is the Bhandarkar Oriental Research edition, that was done by compiling multiple of these editions. Now what we think of as an Indian Mahabharata, there is something which is called as an Indonesian Mahabharata as well, and that has many other variations of the type. For example, in that version, Shikhandi is a wife of Arjun, and Arjun has got twin sisters who are married to Bhim's son. So there are many other variations which take place. So what this Bori people have done is that they have sat and compiled all of these various editions and have deleted out the things which they think are probably supernatural or not really putting in sync with logic. So that formed the main basis for me, as well as there's a very a detailed English translation of the same, which is done by K.M. Ganguly. So both these formed the main basis of my research, and I also related to a book called as Yuganta, which is written by Iravati Karve, and she has done approximately the same thing, that she has dissected out every event in the form of logic versus myth, and that also helped me a lot. So these three basically were the mainstay for my book. Yeah, sure.
So, you said that Karna was Drona's student, but one of the stories we've heard is about Karna posing as a Brahmin and wearing parshurams and scorpion riding. That's one of the other.
Yeah, yeah.
So, how does this event lead into that? Is that also a myth?
Yeah, yeah. The sequence of events is that Karna was at least 10 to 15 years older to Arjun, because he was born before Kunti got married. So he was brought up or adopted by Adhiratha, who was the charioteer of the king of Hastinapur. So by the time Arjun and the Pandavas and the Kauravas started training under Dronacharya at Hastinapur, they were joined by Karna as a student. So in Adi Parva, which is the first Parva of Mahabharata, this incident is described, wherein there were multiple skirmishes, verbal or anything else, which were between these two groups. So basically, the groupism had already started by that time. They were the Pandavas and the Kauravas, which along with Karna. So the whole groupism started there. Then comes the incident where Drona holds an exhibition match for his own royal students, and which is basically gate crashed by Karna. And as the reader reads the thing, he thinks that this is Karna's first entry into their lives. Whereas as you go into flashback mode, you realize that he was already there. Then what happens is that once the duel between Arjun and Karna is stopped due to some reasons, it is after this incident that Karna demands or requests Dronacharya to teach him an astra or a weapon called as the Brahmastra. So this is the weapon that Drona refuses to teach him, stating that this is an astra which is extremely devastating and it requires a person not just of caliber, but a person who has the ability to restrain his temper. And hence he refuses only to teach this specific weapon to Karna. And hence Karna then goes in search of this astra to Parshuram, who is the other guru that he has. So he has two gurus, not one. Thank you. Yeah.
Obviously, you've done a lot of research. Just
Yes.
curious to know how long did you do your research before even starting?
I think it went on almost simultaneously, because there were multiple times that I edited and re-edited the book, and it took me approximately 6 months, I think, to research as well as write it out. And I mostly did my writing at night, so after my work. So it went on simultaneously.
I have another follow-up question to that. You probably given the answer, but I probably missed it earlier. What drew you to writing this story?
Pardon me?
What drew you towards writing the Mahabharata? Obviously, did you start reading it, and then decided to write it, or it's something you decided, like, I'm going to retell the Mahabharata in my own way, and then started doing that?
Yeah, I think Mahabharata is something that every child Indian child has learned, known the stories from their grandmother. But Mahabharata is something which is very difficult, I think, even for a grandmother to tell her children, because it throws up too many embarrassing questions which a grandmother may not be able to answer. And I thought somehow that those questions really needed to be pulled out and presented. I think during the time that I was thinking of presenting my own views, I read a lot of books which were, as I said, that they had a tendency to vilify the heroes and escalate the villains to some point. And I thought it's really not fair. I thought because there is no book written from Arjun's point of view, it's possible that he gets vilified and his silence gets muted or it gets accepted as as a guilty part. So I thought many of his actions needed to be explained and brought out in a proper way. So basically, it was my inborn, or should I say, childhood love for Arjun, which led to the research, which in turn led to the book.
How long did it play in your mind before you decided to pen this? Like all these questions playing in your mind.
Yes.
I need to tell a story.
I think it was just one day when I read two particularly vile books on Arjun, and they really stimulated me. Basically, detonated that bomb in me. In this life. Yeah, in this life. It's possible that I have a past life connection with Arjun. Quite possible. Maybe I was a soldier, working for him. Or maybe I was one of his arrows. Huh? No way. I have no sisterly feelings for Arjun. My feelings are far too passionate. Yes.
Which books were these in particular? I mean, Arjun has always been the one character from the Mahabharata who's had the most experience out of the five brothers.
Yes.
If you look at the entire story, even the Mahabharata as such, he's the guy who's gone into exile by himself. He's the only person who's managed to, he's the only one who's managed to take decisions, follow orders without question, and at the same time, he's the one who's been least written about. But two questions. First, something that came up from your previous discussion. Which books were these in particular? And second, when you were writing about Arjun's point of view, um, why did you include Draupadi? There have been different books on Draupadi's point of view in terms
Correct.
of really performance.
Correct.
Why did you include Draupadi's perspective?
Yeah. Did I get the first question right? You said which books?
Which books in particular were these which you read that vilified Arjun to the point that they drove you?
Okay, okay. So there were multiple books which were written. There were fictional books as well as retellings of the Mahabharata. For example, from Draupadi's point of view, there was the Palace of Illusions and Yajna. Both of these books I thought were far too romantic, and they kind of somehow reduced Draupadi to the point of a petulant adolescent who was basically pining for a person, Karna, who molested her. Now that from a woman's point of view, it just became totally illogical for me, no matter what the writer may have thought of it. Then there were certain books like the Aryavarta Chronicles, which is written by Krishna Nair. So she basically made Arjun almost into a comical character, because in her book, Arjun had to be taught archery by Princess Uttara, who basically was his daughter-in-law. All of these incidents really basically irritated me a lot. And of course, the books written from Karna's point of view, which are multiple, like Radheya, Mrityunjay, and all of which tried to project Arjun as someone who was insecure of his own archery, whereas I think the opposite. It was exactly the opposite, because Karna's main ambition was to reach Arjun, and Arjun's main ambition was totally somewhere at a different level. So those are the books basically which really irritated me. And of course the recent television serials which did the same things of propagating the same old myths. And your second question was why did I include Draupadi as my second narrator? Like I said, one was because Arjun's life is an outward journey. He is always on the go. So there are events happening in when he is not there in the scenario, but which I still wanted to which I talk about. So for that, I needed a second narrator, and I found out the best voice to be Draupadi. Secondly, as I said, on the battlefield, his emotions are totally different. Her emotions are totally different. He is basically doing it against his will, even in spite of the Bhagavad Gita. So he is not going to be talking about his astras, his weapons, his arsenal, his missiles. So those also I wanted to talk about to present the power of Arjun, because somewhere I think because he asked questions on the eve of war. The fact that he asked questions is taken as a question mark on his ability. People say, oh, he didn't know how to do war, or he was not good enough to kill Bhishma and Pitama and Dronacharya. That is why he put these questions and tried to stay away from war. So I wanted to project the fact that his caliber was very much not under question. So for that, again, I needed a second person, not himself, because he would not be bragging about it. So for that, I needed Draupadi as the second person. Thank you so much. Hi, Gauri. Before. Yeah. Yeah, like I said, in the childhood, it was, yeah, yeah, right. Exactly. So I think it started way back in my childhood when it was just basically hero worship of Arjun without knowing why or of the depth of it. It's probably in the past recent years because I read a lot of books from Mahabharata's point of view, and then that's when I realized that people actually do not know so much about him, or maybe even myself do not know so much about him. So what I did was I concreted in my mind that what I felt in my childhood is true, is definitely true because I trust my intuition. So once I decided on that point, I went backwards basically and tried to find out the points which are pro him. And I was quite surprised to see that there are many points which definitely exist right in the epic. I did not even have to invent them or glamorize it for them. They existed with them, but they had been basically covered in multiple retellings and multiple versions. So all I had to do was just uncover them and present them as new. Sure. 5 minutes. Yeah, go ahead. Yes. Yeah. Yeah, so basically, the publisher asked me the same thing. What is your target audience? Is it Indian or is it pan-Indian? And thought to myself that for the Indian audience, this is obviously easy because it's something that they already relate to. But even if you take away the facts about Mahabharat or the miracles or the boons and curses, if you throw away all of that, there still exists within the core of the Mahabharat a very human story because all the possible emotions, treachery, betrayal, love, hatred, everything is simmering right there at the core. So irrespective of what is the audience is, it would definitely relate across the borders. So it doesn't really the Indian context was not so much for me. It could be read by basically any audience and it would still resonate. In fact, if you see there's a lot of parallels that run between the Indian and the Greek mythologies. In fact, when I have a small section at the end of the book where I've tried to correlate Arjun with the expeditions of Achilles, as well as that of Alexander the Great, and I found that there's lots of similarities. For example, Alexander used to think of himself as the son of Zeus, who's the god of heavens, and Zeus used to yield the thunderbolt, and Indra, who is Arjun's father, yielded the Vajra, which is exactly the same as a thunderbolt. So there were many such instances where there are lots of parallels. So I think the mythology or the stories that are existing are probably existing all across the world, not just India. Thank you. Yeah,
Do you have anything else or you done?
I think that's it. That's it. Yeah. Thank you so much. Thank you so much for your presence.